What would you do if 4 people you loved simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind no trace, no clues, no answers, just an empty space where their lives used to be? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this. It's a quiet Sunday morning in Millfield, Northern Oregon. The year is 1994, exactly 30 years after an event that would haunt an entire community forever. Inside St. Mary's of Grace Catholic Church, Father Marcus Sullivan stands at the altar, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of unanswered questions. The stained glass windows cast their familiar kaleidoscope of colors across the wooden pews, but there's something different about this particular memorial service, something that speaks to a mystery so profound, so disturbing, that it has consumed the thoughts and prayers of this small town for an entire generation. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when someone you love just disappears and you're left wondering if you'll ever see them again? Father Marcus knows that feeling all too well, because on this very day 30 years ago, 4 Catholic nuns walked into the wilderness and never came back. But this wasn't just any group of missing persons case. One of those women was his own sister. Sister Dorothy Pierce, 70 years old. Sister Margaret Foster, 67. Sister Rose Martinez, 30. And Sister Catherine Sullivan, just 25 years old. Father Marcus's biological sister, the woman who had shared his childhood, his faith, his deepest conversations about serving God. These weren't strangers who had chosen to disappear. These were devoted religious women who had dedicated their entire lives to prayer, service, and community. Women who would never abandon their sacred vows or leave their loved ones behind without explanation. The morning they vanished, they had set out for what should have been a simple spiritual retreat at a remote chapel near Pine Valley National Forest. 2 days of fasting, prayer, and silence before a Catholic feast day. Routine activities for women of their calling. The diocese had also asked them to assess the old chapel's condition, to determine whether the aging structure should be restored or demolished. Sister Catherine, with her keen eye for detail, had volunteered to document everything they found. Stay with me until the end, because what Father Marcus discovered 3 decades later will challenge everything you think you know about faith, justice, and the depths of human evil. But here's what makes this case so haunting. When the nuns failed to return as scheduled, search parties combed through every inch of that forest. Police officers, volunteers, tracking dogs, everyone looking for any sign of what might have happened. They found nothing. No clothing, no personal belongings, no signs of struggle. No indication that 4 grown women had ever been in that area at all. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed them whole. The official investigation eventually concluded that the women had likely encountered a bear attack. Pine Valley National Forest was known for its dangerous wildlife, but those who knew these sisters personally could never accept that explanation. These were careful, experienced women who understood the risks of wilderness travel. How could 4 people simply vanish without leaving behind a single trace? What you're about to discover might surprise you, because 30 years later, on the exact anniversary of their disappearance, Father Marcus would make a decision that would lead him down a path no one could have imagined, a path that would uncover a truth so shocking, so unthinkable, that it would shake the very foundations of this quiet Oregon community. As the memorial service ended that morning, something profound happened in the way. People connected with their memories. Mrs. Harrison, now in her 80s, approached Father Marcus with the same ritual she had performed every year for 3 decades. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she spoke about Sister Dorothy, remembering how the nun had taught catechism to her children with such gentle patience. She had this way of making even the most restless child feel heard, Mrs. Harrison whispered, her eyes glistening with tears that seemed to carry the weight of all those years. These conversations had become a sacred tradition of their own, community members sharing fragments of memories, keeping alive the essence of women who had touched so many lives. But there was something different about this particular anniversary. The raw, desperate grief that had once consumed these gatherings had transformed over time into something deeper, more contemplative. People no longer spoke with the frantic hope of the early years, when every memory shared felt like a clue that might somehow bring the sisters back. The transformation in how the community processed this loss reveals something fascinating about human resilience. 30 years had taught them that some wounds don't heal in the traditional sense. Instead, they become part of who we are, shaping our decisions and our understanding of life's hidden complexities. But the most profound impact of this ongoing mystery wasn't visible to the congregation. Behind the composed facade that Father Marcus maintained for his parishioners lay a private battle that had raged for 3 decades. After the last person left the church that day, he made his way to his modest office at the rear of the building. This space had become his sanctuary of honest emotion, the one place where he allowed his carefully constructed defenses to crumble. Alone at last, Father Marcus sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands, the weight of maintaining hope for his congregation while battling his own. Devastating doubts had created an internal journey that few could understand. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as he whispered the same questions he had asked God countless times. "Why, Lord? I have served you faithfully all these years. My sister dedicated her life to you. What lesson am I failing to learn from this trial?" These moments of vulnerability revealed the hidden truth about faith under extreme pressure. Behind the scenes of his public ministry, Father Marcus had been wrestling with questions that challenged everything he thought he knew about divine purpose and protection. Now, I want to go even deeper into this emotional landscape, because what happened next would trigger a series of revelations that no one saw coming. On this particular anniversary, something inside Father Marcus shifted. Perhaps it was the accumulation of 30 years of unanswered prayers, or maybe it was a divine prompting he had been too distracted to notice before. Write in the comments, "Faith is a journey," if you've ever questioned your beliefs during difficult times. In that moment of raw vulnerability, Father Marcus reached for the one thing that always brought him both comfort and torment. From the bottom drawer of his desk, he retrieved a small wooden box that held the most precious remnants of his sister's life. These photographs had become his anchor to the past, tangible proof that Catherine had existed, that her joy and purpose had been real. The first image he carefully lifted from the box captured a transformation that still took his breath away. There was Catherine on the day she took her final vows, her young face absolutely radiant beneath her veil. The photograph had preserved that moment of pure spiritual commitment, when his 25-year-old sister had formally dedicated her entire existence to God. Her eyes sparkled with such conviction, such unwavering purpose, that looking at the image filled Father Marcus with an overwhelming mixture of emotions. Pride surged through him as he remembered how extraordinary she had been that day. But alongside that pride came a devastating stab of guilt that had haunted him for 3 decades. Had he influenced her decision too heavily? Their late-night conversations when she was just 16 returned to him with crystal clarity, her eyes alight with religious fervor as she spoke of her calling and his enthusiastic encouragement of her spiritual journey. The hidden truth he wrestled with was whether his guidance had inadvertently led her toward a fate he could never have imagined. This internal battle represents something we all face when tragedy strikes, that crushing weight of wondering if our decisions somehow contributed to outcomes we never intended. The impact of this guilt had shaped every prayer he had offered for 30 years, every sermon he had delivered, every moment he had spent questioning divine purpose. Then he reached for the photograph that changed everything, the final image ever taken of the 4 sisters together. They sat peacefully on a wooden bench outside St. Anne's Chapel, surrounded by the towering trees of Pine Valley National Forest. Sister Dorothy and Sister Margaret, the eldest, appeared serene with their hands folded in their laps. Sister Rose sat beside them with a more relaxed posture, but equally reverent expression. And there was Catherine, the youngest, her bright eyes reflecting the same sense of purpose that had defined her entire adult life. This photograph had been captured by a visiting hiker just days before their disappearance. The nuns had traveled to the remote chapel for what should have been a routine spiritual retreat, 2 days of fasting, prayer, and contemplative silence. But the diocese had also given them a practical mission, to assess the condition of the aging chapel structure and determine whether it should be restored or decommissioned. The behind-the-scenes reality of their journey reveals how perfectly ordinary decisions can lead to extraordinary consequences. Catherine, with her natural attention to detail, had volunteered to document the chapel's structural condition. It was the kind of thorough, dedicated approach that characterized everything she did. Now, I want to explore what this photograph really represents, because hidden within this innocent image lies the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything Father Marcus believed about faith, justice, and the nature of evil itself. Write in the comments, "Small decisions matter," if you believe that seemingly minor choices can change everything. As Father Marcus stared at that final photograph, his mind inevitably drifted to a mental exercise that had become both obsession and torture over the decades. The transformation of time had created a startling reality. If his sister Catherine were still alive today, she would be 55 years old, potentially in the prime of her life, perhaps serving in leadership roles within the Church, maybe even having achieved the kind of spiritual impact she had always dreamed of. This mindset shift revealed something profound about how we process long-term loss. Sister Dorothy would now be 100 years old, Sister Margaret 97. Even if by some miracle they had survived whatever befell them, they would be ancient, frail women whose remaining time would be measured in precious moments. But Catherine and Sister Rose, they would be 60 and 55 respectively. Ages, when many people are just beginning to understand their true purpose in the world. These calculations had become a ritual that Father Marcus performed countless times, each mental journey through the decades bringing a fresh wave of possibility and heartbreak. The hidden truth about prolonged grief is how it forces us to live parallel lives in our imagination, constantly wondering about the paths not taken, the conversations never had, the achievements never celebrated. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of this 30-year mystery was how completely the original investigation had failed to provide any answers whatsoever. The impact of that failure had shaped not just Father Marcus's life, but the entire community's understanding of justice and closure. Despite extensive searches that had mobilized hundreds of volunteers, police officers, and tracking specialists, the forest had revealed absolutely nothing. Search parties had systematically combed through every inch of underbrush in Pine Valley National Forest. They had scaled mountainsides, explored caves, and spread their investigation throughout surrounding farms, villages, and towns. The behind-the-scenes reality of that search effort was staggering in its thoroughness, yet the complete absence of any trace evidence defied all logical explanation. Think about this for a moment. 4 adult women, traveling together, carrying personal belongings, wearing distinctive religious habits. How does such a group simply vanish without leaving behind a single clue? No scraps of fabric caught on branches, no personal items dropped along trails, no signs of struggle, no indication that they had ever been in that area at all. The transformation of a comprehensive search into complete bewilderment reveals just how extraordinary this disappearance truly was. The psychological journey that investigators experienced mirrors what many of us face when confronted with inexplicable events. Their confidence gradually eroded as each promising lead dissolved into nothing. Each potential breakthrough revealed itself as another dead end. The very foundations of their investigative expertise seemed to crumble against the stark reality that sometimes people just disappear. Now, I want to examine what happens when conventional wisdom fails completely, because the decisions Father Marcus was about to make on this 30th anniversary would challenge everything the authorities thought they knew about this case. Write in the comments, "Some mysteries run deeper," if you believe there are things in this world that conventional investigation simply cannot explain. When faced with an impossible mystery, human nature demands explanations, even inadequate ones. The official conclusion that emerged from the failed investigation demonstrates how institutions often choose convenient narratives over uncomfortable truths. After months of fruitless searching, authorities settled on a bear attack as the most plausible explanation for the disappearance of 4 nuns. Pine Valley National Forest was indeed known for its wildlife, including black bears that could become dangerously aggressive when threatened or protecting their territory. From a purely logical standpoint, this theory offered the community something they desperately needed: closure. Bears could theoretically account for the complete absence of evidence. Predators are known to drag prey far from initial encounter sites. Potentially, consuming or scattering remains beyond detection. But this explanation revealed a fundamental disconnect between bureaucratic necessity and lived reality. Those who knew these women intimately understood that such experienced religious sisters would never have wandered carelessly into dangerous territory. The transformation of 4 careful, dedicated women into reckless victims felt like a betrayal of their memory and intelligence. Father Marcus found this official narrative particularly hollow, because it ignored the deeper truth about his sister's character. Catherine had always been methodical, cautious, deeply respectful of both nature and safety protocols. The idea that she and her companions had somehow stumbled into a fatal encounter with wildlife contradicted everything he knew about their training and temperament. Even more disturbing than the inadequate official explanation were the ugly rumors that began circulating through the community over the years. Behind the scenes of public sympathy, whispered speculation suggested that the nuns had deliberately abandoned their religious vows and run away to start new lives elsewhere. These theories gained traction precisely because they offered an alternative to accepting that something truly sinister might have occurred. The impact of these rumors created a secondary trauma for families and church leadership. Father Marcus and other church officials found themselves fighting a constant battle against doubt and innuendo. The hidden cruelty of this speculation lay in how it transformed victims into villains, suggesting that women who had dedicated their lives to God had somehow been living lies. This mindset shift from sympathy to suspicion reveals something troubling about how communities process inexplicable tragedies. When faced with mysteries that challenge our understanding of safety and order, we sometimes prefer explanations that blame the victims rather than confront the possibility that genuine evil might be operating in our midst. For Father Marcus, these whispered accusations represented a profound attack on everything he believed about his sister's character. Catherine's faith had been unshakable, her commitment to religious life absolute. The idea that she would abandon her vows without a word to him felt impossible. Their relationship had been built on complete honesty and shared spiritual journey. Now, I want to explore what happens when someone refuses to accept convenient explanations and decides to seek truth regardless of the personal cost, because Father Marcus was about to make a decision that would change everything. Write in the comments, truth over comfort. If you believe some people will always choose difficult reality over easy lies. Something profound shifted within Father Marcus as he sat there holding that final photograph of his sister and her companions. On this 30th anniversary, a strange compulsion began to grow in his heart, an almost irresistible urge to visit St. Anne's Chapel, to walk where Catherine had walked and pray where she had prayed during those final days of her life. The transformation of grief into action represents a pivotal moment in anyone's journey through loss. Was this merely sentimentality, a desperate attempt to feel close to his sister on this particularly difficult day? The rational part of his mind suggested that revisiting the site of their disappearance would only reopen wounds that had taken decades to partially heal. But beneath that logical thinking, a small voice whispered something that made his pulse quicken. Perhaps there was still something to be discovered there, some overlooked clue that the initial investigation had missed. This internal debate reveals the hidden truth about how our subconscious mind processes unresolved trauma. Sometimes what we dismiss as emotion is actually intuition, trying to guide us toward revelations that our logical thinking hasn't yet recognized. The impact of this mysterious prompting was so powerful that Father Marcus found himself making a decision that surprised even him. Within an hour, he was sliding behind the wheel of his modest sedan, carefully placing that precious photograph of the 4 nuns on the passenger seat beside him. The journey to Pine Valley National Forest would take approximately 90 minutes, winding through landscapes that held both beauty and painful memories. As he pulled away from St. Mary's of Grace Church, Father Marcus offered a brief prayer for guidance, uncertain whether he was following divine inspiration or simply surrendering to 30 years of accumulated desperation. The road ahead carried him through a transformation of scenery that mirrored his own internal journey. The town's neat houses and familiar businesses gradually gave way to scattered farms, where wide fields stretched toward distant mountains. These agricultural areas eventually surrendered to encroaching wilderness, as tall pines and cedars began crowding the roadside, their shadows creating a dappled pattern across the asphalt that seemed to pull him deeper into memories he had tried to suppress. Behind the scenes of this seemingly simple drive lay decades of similar journeys. During those frantic weeks following the disappearance, Father Marcus had made this same trip countless times, his car filled with missing person flyers bearing Catherine's face, his heart buoyed by desperate hope that this time would be different. The psychological impact of retracing those steps after 30 years created an almost surreal experience. Driving the same route, but as a completely different man shaped by 3 decades of unanswered questions. The changing landscape outside his window seemed to reflect the evolution of his own mindset over the years. Where once he had driven this route with urgent purpose, now he traveled with a quieter determination, carrying not flyers and hope, but photographs and a strange sense that today might finally bring the revelations he had been seeking. Now, I want to share what happened when Father Marcus reached his destination, because what he discovered there would challenge everything he thought he knew about his sister's disappearance. Write in the comments, following intuition, if you've ever felt compelled to take action based on a feeling you couldn't quite explain. When Father Marcus reached what should have been the familiar turnoff to St. Anne's Chapel, the transformation of the landscape stopped him cold. Instead of the simple dirt path he had navigated so many times during those desperate search weeks 30 years ago, he found himself staring at a paved private road blocked by an ornate iron gate. Imposing no trespassing signs flanked the entrance, and beyond the barrier, ornamental trees and perfectly manicured shrubs lined what appeared to be an expensive private driveway. The psychological impact of this discovery was staggering. For 3 decades, Father Marcus had carried a mental image of St. Anne's Chapel as a fixed point in the world, a sacred space where his sister had spent her final days, a tangible connection to her memory that he could always revisit. The complete absence of any familiar landmarks created a disorienting sense that perhaps he had taken a wrong turn, that his grief-addled mind had led him astray. But as he consulted the photograph he had brought, comparing the background, landscape to what he could see from his position, the devastating truth became clear. The mountains in the distance matched perfectly, as did the particular arrangement of taller trees on the ridgeline. This was indeed the correct location, but the chapel, that modest white building with its simple bell tower that had served as the last known location of 4 missing nuns, had completely vanished from existence. The hidden reality behind this transformation would soon become clear when Father Marcus reached for his cell phone with trembling fingers. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for George Patterson, the longtime caretaker of St. Anne's who had maintained the property for decades. They hadn't spoken in years, but Father Marcus hoped the man might still be in the area and able to provide some explanation for this bewildering discovery. When George's gruff voice answered the phone, the conversation that followed revealed decisions that had been made behind the scenes, far from Father Marcus's awareness. The diocese had quietly decommissioned the chapel years earlier and sold the entire property in 1984 to a wealthy man named Victor Blackwood, who had immediately demolished the building. The journey toward this revelation exposed a painful truth about institutional memory and communication. George explained that after the nuns' disappearance, attendance at the remote chapel had dropped significantly. The community's association of the place with the tragedy, combined with a dangerous structural incident involving the bell tower that nearly injured the temporary caretaker, had convinced the bishop that the building simply wasn't worth maintaining for such a diminished congregation. This mindset shift from viewing the chapel as a sacred space to seeing it as a financial burden reveals how tragedy can transform the very meaning of places we hold dear. The impact of the nuns' disappearance had created a ripple effect that ultimately led to the erasure of the location itself, as if the diocese had decided that removing the physical reminder might somehow help the community heal. Now, I want to examine what happens when sacred spaces disappear and how this discovery would lead Father Marcus down a path that no one could have anticipated. Write in the comments. Sacred spaces matter. If you believe certain places hold memories and meaning that shouldn't be erased. The information that George shared about the property's new owner created an immediate sense of unease that Father Marcus couldn't quite shake. Victor Blackwood was described as a wealthy recluse who had transformed the former chapel site into part of an extensive private estate. The transformation from sacred space to exclusive property represented more than just a change in ownership. It felt like a deliberate erasure of the location's spiritual significance. George's voice carried a note of caution as he explained that Blackwood's main residence sat deeper in the forest, where the trees grew thicker and more imposing. The man was notorious throughout the local community for his inhospitable nature toward visitors, keeping entirely to himself and rarely engaging with longtime residents who had lived in the area for generations. This mindset of extreme isolation seemed particularly strange for someone who had chosen to build his home in a region known for its tight-knit rural communities. The behind-the-scenes reality of Blackwood's presence in their area revealed something troubling about how wealth can create barriers between people. While most property owners in Pine Valley developed relationships with their neighbors, sharing the kind of mutual support that defines rural life, Blackwood had constructed both physical and social walls that kept everyone at a distance. The impact of his standoffish behavior had created an atmosphere of speculation and mistrust among locals who couldn't understand why someone would choose to live in such isolation. But George's next offer provided a stark contrast to the coldness surrounding Blackwood's estate. With genuine warmth in his voice, the elderly caretaker explained that he had thoughtfully preserved several meaningful items from St. Anne's Chapel during the decommissioning process. The old altar cross, prayer books, and other religious artifacts had been carefully stored in his nearby home, waiting for someone who would appreciate their spiritual significance. This act of preservation reveals something beautiful about human nature. How some people instinctively understand that sacred objects hold memories and meaning that transcend their material value. George's decision to rescue these items from demolition demonstrated a reverence for the chapel's spiritual legacy that the institutional church had apparently abandoned. The hidden truth was that while official entities had written off St. Anne's as financially unsustainable, this humble caretaker had recognized the deeper value of maintaining connections to the sacred. The journey to George's home would take only 15 minutes from their current location, but Father Marcus found himself torn between practical choices that would shape the rest of his day. He could take the safe path, visiting the preserved artifacts and finding whatever comfort they might provide, allowing this anniversary pilgrimage to end on a note of bittersweet remembrance. Or he could follow the growing curiosity about Victor Blackwood and his mysterious estate built on the exact spot where his sister had last been seen alive. Now, I want to explore what happens when curiosity overcomes caution, because Father Marcus was about to make a decision that would change everything he thought he knew about his sister's disappearance. Write in the comments, "Curiosity calls," if you believe some mysteries demand investigation, regardless of the personal risks involved. The transformation from uncertainty to determination happened almost instantly in Father Marcus's mind. While George's kind offer to view the preserved chapel artifacts held genuine appeal, a stronger impulse pulled him toward the mystery of Victor Blackwood and his estate built on sacred ground. Something about the man's notorious reclusiveness and apparent hostility toward the local community had awakened a curiosity that demanded answers. Following George's directions, Father Marcus found himself driving along a narrow public road that skirted the edges of what must have been Blackwood's extensive property. Through carefully placed gaps in the trees, he caught tantalizing glimpses of meticulously manicured grounds that spoke of professional landscaping and unlimited financial resources. The contrast between this level of wealth and the modest rural surroundings was striking and somehow unsettling. As the road curved, a full view of Blackwood's residence came into sight, and Father Marcus couldn't help but slow his vehicle to absorb the impact of what he was seeing. The structure was nothing short of impressive. A massive mountain lodge constructed from natural stone and timber, rising 3 full stories with expansive windows that seemed to watch over the forest below. Multiple terraces and balconies overlooked the surrounding wilderness, creating the impression of a fortress disguised as a luxury retreat. The hidden truth about this architectural statement was how completely it dominated the landscape where St. Anne's Chapel had once offered humble spiritual refuge. The mindset behind such construction revealed someone who valued privacy and control above community connection, someone who had chosen to build monuments to isolation rather than bridges to neighbors. Father Marcus located a small parking area near what appeared to be a service entrance and steeled himself for what might prove to be an uncomfortable conversation. As he approached the imposing front entrance along a stone pathway lined with carefully tended gardens, his clerical collar felt heavier than usual, as if he were carrying the weight of his sister's memory into potentially hostile territory. When he knocked firmly on the heavy oak door, it swung open almost immediately, revealing a tall, athletic man in his 60s whose physical presence commanded immediate attention. Victor Blackwood's silver hair was perfectly trimmed, and he wore expensive exercise attire that suggested both wealth and vanity. But what struck Father Marcus most powerfully was the instant transformation in the man's expression when he registered the clerical collar. Blackwood's face shifted from neutral expectation to unmistakable displeasure in the span of a heartbeat, and he made absolutely no effort to disguise his irritation. In one hand, he held a leather dog leash, and his fingers tightened around it as his jaw tensed with barely controlled hostility. This wasn't simply the reaction of someone annoyed by an unexpected visitor. This was the response of someone who harbored a deep, personal antipathy toward religious representatives. Now, I want to reveal exactly what happened during this confrontation, because the conversation that followed would expose disturbing truths about the man who had erased the last place Father Marcus's sister was ever seen alive. Write in the comments. First impressions matter. If you believe people's immediate reactions often reveal their true character. The confrontation that unfolded on Victor Blackwood's doorstep revealed layers of hostility that went far beyond simple rudeness. When Father Marcus politely introduced himself and explained his connection to the former chapel site, Blackwood's response was immediate and aggressive. He accused the priest of trespassing on private property, his voice carrying an edge that bordered on threatening. The transformation from a wealthy property owner answering his door to someone exhibiting barely controlled rage happened so quickly that it left Father Marcus momentarily stunned. What made this encounter particularly unsettling was Blackwood's complete refusal to engage in basic social courtesies. When Father Marcus extended his hand in greeting, explaining his peaceful intentions and personal connection to the location, Blackwood made no move to reciprocate. Instead, his fingers tightened around the leather dog leash in his grip, and he stepped forward in a way that felt deliberately menacing. His demand to know what the priest wanted carried the tone of someone accustomed to intimidating visitors into leaving quickly. But the hidden truth about Blackwood's character emerged most clearly when the conversation turned to the chapel's former spiritual significance. Father Marcus mentioned the Angelus bell that had once rung 3 times daily, calling the faithful to prayer and marking the sacred rhythms of monastic life. Blackwood's reaction revealed a mindset that went beyond mere secular indifference. This was active contempt for religious tradition. The property owner scoffed openly at the very concept of the bell's spiritual importance, dismissing it as medieval noise pollution that had given him migraines. His disdain wasn't limited to the practical inconvenience. He seemed personally offended by the idea that religious practices might hold meaning for others. When Father Marcus attempted to explain the beautiful tradition of the Angelus prayer and its significance in honoring divine incarnation, Blackwood's response was cruelly dismissive. The impact of this exchange went far beyond a simple disagreement about noise ordinances. Blackwood suggested that people could simply set phone alarms if they needed reminders to pray, reducing centuries of sacred tradition to mere convenience technology. His contempt for religious practices became increasingly apparent with each word, revealing someone who harbored a deep, personal animosity toward faith itself. Behind the scenes of this confrontation lay something more disturbing than simple atheism or religious indifference. The intensity of Blackwood's hostility suggested personal wounds or experiences that had transformed him into someone who couldn't tolerate even the presence of religious representatives on his property. The journey from neutral disbelief to active antagonism requires specific catalysts that shape a person's entire worldview. As Father Marcus attempted to maintain his composure in the face of such unexpected aggression, he began to sense that this encounter was revealing something significant about the man who had chosen to build his fortress on the exact spot where 4 nuns had last been seen alive. Now, I want to explore what happened when this conversation reached its breaking point, because Blackwood's final actions would leave Father Marcus with questions that demanded investigation. Write in the comments. Actions reveal truth. If you believe people's hostility often masks deeper secrets they're trying to protect. The conversation reached its breaking point when Father Marcus attempted one final approach, suggesting they might speak another day when it was more convenient for Blackwood. The transformation in the property owner's demeanor became even more pronounced as he flatly declared there would never be another day for such discussions. His threat to call the sheriff and report Father Marcus for trespassing carried the weight of someone accustomed to using wealth and influence to eliminate problems. The impact of having a door slammed firmly in his face left Father Marcus standing on the stone pathway, processing an encounter that had revealed far more than he had expected. This wasn't simply the response of someone protecting their privacy or expressing secular indifference to religious matters. The intensity of Blackwood's hostility suggested something pathological, a deep-seated antipathy toward the church and its representatives that seemed to consume him from within. As Father Marcus made his way back to his vehicle, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched from one of the mansion's upper windows. The sensation of hostile observation prickled at the back of his neck, creating an atmosphere of menace that extended far beyond their brief confrontation. The hidden truth was that this encounter had awakened suspicions that would prove impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes of his disappointment lay a growing conviction that Victor Blackwood was hiding something significant. The man's extreme reaction to a simple inquiry about the former chapel site suggested secrets that demanded protection. But as Father Marcus drove away from the estate, questioning his decision to pursue this mysterious property owner, something extraordinary happened that would change the entire trajectory of his investigation. The journey past the former chapel site should have been merely a moment of sad reflection, but instead it became the catalyst for revelations that defied rational explanation. As his sedan rounded the bend that brought him within view of where St. Anne's Chapel had once stood, his car radio suddenly crackled to life with the unmistakable sound of Gregorian chant. The ancient, ethereal music of monastic worship filled the vehicle for several haunting seconds, despite the fact that Father Marcus distinctly remembered turning the radio off when he left the church that morning. The transformation from silence to sacred music created an atmosphere that seemed to transcend the physical world, as if some spiritual force was attempting to communicate with him through the most unlikely medium. When Father Marcus reached for the radio dial, his hands were trembling slightly. He turned the device on and then off again, but the mysterious chanting did not return. The mindset shift from skeptical doubt to wondering acceptance happened gradually as he sat there, questioning whether grief and exhaustion had caused him to imagine the entire experience. Now, I want to reveal what this supernatural encounter meant for Father Marcus's understanding of his mission, because what happened next would compel him to take actions that no rational person would consider. Write in the comments, "Signs appear unexpectedly," if you believe the universe sometimes communicates through seemingly impossible events. The inexplicable radio incident triggered something profound within Father Marcus that transcended rational. Who thought? As he sat in his parked vehicle, the hair on his arms began to stand on end, and a familiar warmth spread through his chest. Physical sensations he had experienced before during moments of intense prayer or spiritual insight. His seminary training had taught him to recognize these as potential movements of the Holy Spirit, and the transformation from confusion to clarity was unmistakable. This wasn't simply grief or wishful thinking manifesting as supernatural experience. The impact of this spiritual prompting filled him with an inexplicable certainty that he was meant to be here, at this specific moment, for a purpose he didn't yet understand. The mindset shift from disappointed priest returning home empty-handed to spiritual detective following divine guidance happened almost instantaneously. Behind the scenes of this mystical encounter lay a decision that would change everything. Rather than driving away from Blackwood's property and returning to the safety of his parish duties, Father Marcus found himself executing a careful U-turn and heading back toward the gate that blocked access to the former chapel site. The journey from rational caution to faith-driven action represents one of those pivotal moments when someone chooses to follow their deepest convictions despite potential consequences. What happened next reveals how the universe sometimes provides opportunities in the most unexpected ways. As Father Marcus parked near the imposing gate and began walking along the property's perimeter fence, seeking any vantage point from which to view the former chapel site, he was thinking more about spiritual significance than physical access. The transformation from visitor to trespasser was never his intention. His foot caught on an exposed tree root hidden beneath fallen leaves, sending him stumbling forward with momentum he couldn't control. In that split second of imbalance, Father Marcus reached out instinctively to steady himself, his hands grasping the metal fence just as his full weight pressed against a section where the posts had been set in uneven ground. The sharp cracking sound that followed seemed to echo through the forest as the weakened joint gave way under pressure. The hidden truth about this accident was how perfectly it aligned with his growing conviction that divine intervention was guiding his actions. Here was a priest who would never deliberately damage property or knowingly trespass, suddenly faced with an opening that seemed to have been created by forces beyond his control. The impact of finding himself sprawled partially onto Blackwood's property, with the broken fence creating an unexpected entry point, felt like confirmation that his spiritual prompting had been authentic. As Father Marcus picked himself up and brushed soil from his clothes, he faced a decision that would test everything he believed about moral obligations versus divine calling. The gap in the fence was large enough for a person to squeeze through, and beyond it lay the landscaped area where St. Anne's Chapel had once stood. Now, I want to share what Father Marcus discovered when he stepped through that breach, because what he found hidden beneath the ornamental shrubbery would unlock a mystery 30 years in the making. Write in the comments, "Divine timing exists," if you believe some accidents are actually providence creating opportunities we never expected. After a moment of prayer and moral wrestling, Father Marcus made the decision that would alter the course of his entire investigation. He carefully squeezed through the gap in the broken fence, stepping onto Blackwood's property with a mixture of trepidation and spiritual conviction. The transformation from law-abiding citizen to trespasser felt surreal, but the compelling sense that he was following divine guidance overshadowed his concerns about legal boundaries. Once on the property, the full impact of what Blackwood had done to the former chapel site became devastatingly clear. The area had been completely transformed with non-native ornamental plants that seemed jarringly out of place against the natural forest backdrop. Exotic shrubs and carefully manicured decorative trees created an artificial landscape that felt more like a wealthy suburb than the remote wilderness setting where St. Anne's Chapel had once offered humble spiritual refuge. The hidden truth about this transformation was its thoroughness. Nothing remained to indicate that a place of worship had ever existed here. No foundation stones marked where the altar had stood, no weathered cross commemorated the sacred space, no memorial of any kind acknowledged the spiritual significance this location had held for generations of faithful believers. The mindset behind such complete erasure suggested someone who wanted to obliterate not just the physical structure, but the very memory of what had once been. As Father Marcus stood contemplating this deliberate destruction of sacred history, a flash of reflected sunlight caught his eye near the ground. Something metallic was partially hidden beneath the decorative shrubbery, and his curiosity compelled him to investigate further. Moving closer and carefully parting the ornamental branches, he discovered what appeared to be an old metal grate set directly into the earth. The discovery of this vintage air vent created an immediate sense of puzzlement that transcended his grief over the chapel's erasure. The iron bars were heavily rusted with age, and the ornate scrollwork around its edges suggested craftsmanship from the 1930s or 40s, decades before Blackwood had purchased the property. The design seemed completely incongruous with the modern minimalist aesthetic that characterized the rest of the estate. Behind the scenes of this strange finding lay questions that demanded answers. If Blackwood had completely demolished St. Anne's Chapel and redesigned the landscape according to his own vision, why would an old air vent remain? The journey from confusion to growing suspicion began as Father Marcus crouched beside the grate, examining its weathered details more closely. Why would landscaped grounds with no structures require ventilation of any kind? The impact of this discovery went far beyond simple architectural curiosity. As Father Marcus leaned closer to the mysterious vent, trying to understand its purpose, he became aware of something that made his blood run cold. From somewhere beneath the ground, so faint that at first he thought he might be imagining it, came the unmistakable sound of human activity. Now, I want to reveal exactly what Father Marcus heard coming from that underground space, because this discovery would transform his spiritual pilgrimage into a rescue mission that would expose secrets 30 years in the making. Write in the comments, hidden in plain sight, if you believe the most shocking truths are often concealed beneath seemingly ordinary surfaces. The sound that drifted up through the rusted grate transformed Father Marcus's entire understanding of what he was experiencing. Soft, melodic humming rose from the depths below, followed unmistakably by distinctly human coughing. This wasn't the product of grief-induced imagination or electrical malfunction. Someone was definitely alive beneath the ground where St. Anne's Chapel had once stood. The impact of this revelation hit him like a physical blow. The humming carried an eerily familiar quality that reminded him of the Gregorian chant that had mysteriously emanated from his car radio just minutes earlier. But this was no supernatural phenomenon or technological glitch. This was a human voice, weak but unmistakably real, coming from what appeared to be an underground chamber directly beneath the former chapel site. The transformation from spiritual pilgrimage to potential rescue mission happened instantly in Father Marcus's mind. When he called softly through the grate, asking if anyone could hear him, the humming continued uninterrupted, suggesting that whoever was below couldn't detect his voice from their subterranean location. The hidden truth was becoming increasingly clear. Victor Blackwood's property concealed secrets that went far beyond mere hostility toward religious institutions. Behind the scenes of this discovery lay a decision that would test every aspect of Father Marcus's character. The journey from concerned visitor to emergency responder required him to overcome his natural reluctance to involve authorities in what might be a complex situation. But the mindset shift from protecting his own reputation to protecting a life in potential danger left him with no choice. With trembling hands, Father Marcus reached for his cell phone and dialed 911. The conversation that followed would require him to explain circumstances that sounded almost impossible to believe. How do you tell a dispatcher that you've accidentally trespassed onto private property and discovered evidence of someone being held underground? The impact of admitting his trespassing while reporting a potential emergency created a moral complexity that challenged his usual clear-cut understanding of right and wrong. Despite the strangeness of his report, Father Marcus managed to convey the urgency of his concerns to the dispatcher. He explained his location at Blackwood's property, described the mysterious sounds emanating from the hidden vent, and emphasized that someone might be trapped or held against their will in an underground space. The transformation from private citizen to emergency reporter felt surreal, but the faint sounds of human distress below ground made every other consideration secondary. The dispatcher's questions revealed how extraordinary his situation truly was. When asked if he was on the property legally, Father Marcus had to admit his accidental breach of the fence while explaining that this appeared to be a genuine emergency requiring immediate investigation. The behind-the-scenes reality was that he was risking legal consequences by remaining on Blackwood's property, but the possibility that someone needed rescue made those risks irrelevant. Now, I want to explore what happened when the authorities arrived and how this discovery would expose a truth so shocking that it would rewrite everything Father Marcus thought he knew about his sister's disappearance. Write in the comments, "Lives matter more than laws, if you believe." Some situations justify breaking rules to help others in danger. While waiting for the authorities to arrive, Father Marcus realized he needed more information about the underground space he had discovered. The transformation from uncertainty to investigative determination led him to call George Patterson again, seeking crucial details about the chapel's original construction. When the elderly caretaker answered, Father Marcus explained what he had found beneath Blackwood's landscaped grounds. George's response eliminated any possibility that this underground chamber was some forgotten relic from the chapel's original construction. The caretaker was adamant and unwavering in his certainty. St. Anne's Chapel had been built on a simple slab foundation with absolutely no basement, crypt, or underground structure of any kind. Having maintained the property for 20 years with intimate knowledge of every aspect of its construction, George could state definitively that no subterranean spaces had ever existed beneath the sacred building. The impact of this revelation was staggering. If no underground chambers had existed during the chapel's era, then whatever Father Marcus had discovered was entirely Blackwood's creation. The hidden truth was becoming increasingly disturbing. The mysterious property owner had constructed an underground space at the exact location where 4 nuns had last been seen alive 30 years ago. The mindset required to undertake such a project suggested planning and purpose that went far beyond simple property development. Behind the scenes of this telephone conversation, the sound of approaching sirens began to penetrate the forest stillness. Deputies Morrison and Anderson from the county sheriff's department arrived with the kind of professional determination that suggested they took Father Marcus's emergency call seriously. The transformation from rural property dispute to potential welfare crisis was immediately apparent in their approach to the situation. Deputy Morrison, the older of the 2 officers, demonstrated an understanding of the situation's gravity that put Father Marcus at ease. Rather than focusing on the minor trespassing violation, he immediately emphasized that if someone was indeed trapped or held against their will, that welfare concern took absolute precedence over property law violations. This journey from potential legal trouble to collaborative investigation represented a crucial shift in how the situation would unfold. The younger Deputy Anderson took detailed notes as Father Marcus explained the circumstances that had led to his discovery. The impact of having law enforcement treat his report as credible rather than dismissing it as the product of grief or imagination validated Father Marcus's decision to risk trespassing charges in order to investigate the mysterious sounds. The behind-the-scenes reality was that these officers recognized something significant in the combination of factors Father Marcus presented: a property owner with a reputation for hostility, an underground structure that shouldn't exist, and the unmistakable sounds of human distress coming from beneath the earth. Their mindset shifted from routine property call to potential rescue operation as they processed the implications of what they were hearing. Now, I want to reveal what happened when these experienced law enforcement officers heard the sounds for themselves, because their reaction would confirm that Father Marcus had stumbled upon something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Write in the comments, "Trust your instincts," if you believe experienced professionals can quickly recognize when something is seriously wrong. The moment that would validate Father Marcus's entire investigation came when all 4 men gathered around the mysterious air vent. George Patterson had arrived as promised, bringing his intimate knowledge of the chapel's history, and now the group stood together in tense silence, listening intently for any sound from below. The transformation from skeptical law enforcement call to urgent rescue operation happened in the space of a few heartbeats. From beneath the earth came the unmistakable sound of a woman's voice, weak but clear, humming a melody that sent chills through everyone present. The haunting tune was Salve Regina, an ancient Marian antiphon that had been sung in monasteries and convents for centuries. For Father Marcus, the recognition was immediate and profound. This was sacred music that only someone with deep religious training would know so intimately. The impact of hearing this ethereal melody drifting up through rusted iron bars created an atmosphere that transcended ordinary police work. Deputy Morrison and Deputy Anderson exchanged significant glances as the implications became clear. They weren't dealing with a random trespasser or squatter, but potentially someone with religious connections who had been trapped underground for an unknown period of time. The labored breathing and dry, rasping cough that followed the humming suggested immediate medical attention might be crucial. Behind the scenes of this discovery lay the realization that their welfare check had transformed into something far more serious. The mindset shift from property dispute to potential kidnapping case happened instantly among the law enforcement officers. The journey from routine call to criminal investigation required immediate action, starting with a direct confrontation with Victor Blackwood himself. The group made their way to Blackwood's imposing residence, where the property owner's reaction would prove more revealing than any of them anticipated. When the door opened, Blackwood appeared dressed in expensive exercise attire, leading a large German shepherd whose presence seemed calculated to intimidate visitors. The transformation in his expression from polite inquiry to barely contained rage was immediate and telling when he spotted Father Marcus and George among the deputies. His furious demand to know why these trespassers were on his property again revealed a level of hostility that went far beyond normal privacy concerns. The hidden truth about Blackwood's extreme reaction was becoming increasingly apparent. This wasn't someone protecting legitimate interests, but rather someone whose secrets were being threatened by unwanted scrutiny. The impact of facing law enforcement while maintaining his aggressive posture created a dynamic that exposed Blackwood's true character. Rather than showing concern about potential emergency situations on his property, he focused entirely on his anger toward the returning visitors. This mindset suggested someone whose primary concern was controlling access to information rather than ensuring human welfare. Deputy Morrison's professional approach to explaining their welfare check mission created an interesting contrast to Blackwood's barely controlled fury, setting up a confrontation that would reveal just how far the property owner was willing to go to protect his secrets. Now, I want to explore what happened when Blackwood was forced to explain the underground sounds, because his responses would expose lies that had been carefully constructed over 3 decades. Write in the comments. Body language speaks volumes. If you believe people's physical reactions often reveal more truth than their words. When Deputy Morrison calmly explained that they had received reports of sounds coming from what appeared to be an underground structure on the property, Blackwood's response revealed the practiced nature of his deception. Without missing a beat, he claimed that during his extensive landscaping work, he had installed a sophisticated drainage system to manage water runoff from the mountainous terrain. The air vent, he insisted dismissively, was merely a decorative grate covering drain pipes, nothing more sinister than practical property management. But Father Marcus caught something that the deputies might have missed in their focus on gathering information. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across Blackwood's expression when directly questioned about the underground vent. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. A momentary faltering, a brief crack in his confident facade before his face hardened into obstinate refusal to cooperate further. The impact of witnessing this psychological tell confirmed Father Marcus's growing suspicions about the man's truthfulness. Behind the scenes of Blackwood's smooth explanations lay someone who had clearly rehearsed these responses, someone whose mindset was focused entirely on deflecting investigation rather than addressing legitimate welfare concerns. The hidden truth was that drainage systems don't sing Marian antiphons or cough with distinctly human distress. The journey from confrontation to legal action moved swiftly, once the deputies recognized the inconsistencies in Blackwood's story. Deputy Morrison's years of experience had taught him to recognize when reasonable suspicion warranted official intervention, and the combination of witness testimony, physical evidence, and Blackwood's evasive behavior created a compelling case for immediate action. Within hours, Judge Martinez had reviewed the circumstances and granted an emergency search warrant based on reasonable suspicion of unlawful confinement. The transformation from property dispute to criminal investigation reflected the legal system's recognition that human welfare concerns override privacy rights when someone's life might be in danger. The judge's sympathy for their concerns allowed law enforcement to move forward with comprehensive investigation authority. The scope of the warrant was deliberately broad, permitting officers to search not just Blackwood's main residence, but all grounds, outbuildings, and any basement areas that might exist on the property. This legal transformation from limited welfare check to full property search represented a significant escalation that would give investigators the tools they needed to uncover whatever secrets lay beneath the ornamental landscaping. The impact of having official authorization meant that Blackwood's wealth and influence could no longer shield him from scrutiny. The mindset shift from protected property owner to subject of criminal investigation would strip away the barriers he had constructed over decades of careful isolation. Now, I want to reveal what happened when law enforcement returned with that warrant, because the discoveries they made would expose a truth so horrifying that it would rewrite the entire understanding of what had happened to those 4 missing nuns 30 years earlier. Write in the comments. Truth finds a way. If you believe justice eventually prevails, even when powerful people try to hide their crimes. The execution of the search warrant represented a transformation from speculation to systematic investigation that would finally expose secrets buried for 3 decades. Deputy Morrison had arranged for body camera footage to be streamed live, allowing Father Marcus and George to monitor the proceedings from their vehicle positioned safely on the public road. This behind-the-scenes access created an unprecedented opportunity to witness justice unfolding in real time. Through the small phone screen, they observed Blackwood's explosive rage when presented with the official warrant. His protests, threats of lawsuits, and frantic calls to his attorney revealed someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing under legal scrutiny. The transformation from confident property owner to desperate criminal suspect happened with stunning rapidity as officers methodically began their examination of his main residence and conventional basement areas. The impact of watching this confrontation through technology created an almost surreal experience for Father Marcus. After 30 years of unanswered questions, he was finally witnessing the moment when his sister's disappearance might be explained. The mindset shift from hopeful observer to potential witness in a criminal case added weight to every movement he watched on that small screen. The journey through Blackwood's property revealed the extent of his wealth and isolation, but the main house yielded nothing suspicious during the initial search. It was when the officers moved to examine outbuildings along the forest road that the hidden truth began to emerge. A modest storage shed, described by Blackwood as containing only garden equipment and maintenance supplies, would prove to be the key to unlocking decades of carefully concealed crimes. The discovery that changed everything happened almost by accident, demonstrating how Providence sometimes works through the smallest details. Deputy Anderson had been examining the shed's contents when he accidentally dropped a heavy wrench, which landed on the wooden floor with an unexpectedly hollow sound. That acoustic difference immediately caught his attention, transforming routine search into focused investigation. When the officers began tapping experimentally on different sections of the floorboards, the revelation became undeniable. Several boards in one corner sounded completely different from the rest, suggesting empty space beneath. The boards themselves appeared newer than the surrounding flooring, indicating recent construction designed to conceal whatever lay below. As they carefully removed the suspicious planks, what emerged defied all expectations. Ancient-looking stone steps descended into darkness, appearing to be carved directly into the bedrock beneath the shed. The wear patterns on these steps told a story of regular use over many years, suggesting this wasn't some abandoned relic, but an actively maintained passage to secrets below. The behind-the-scenes reality was that Blackwood had constructed an elaborate system of concealment, hiding the entrance to his underground chambers within what appeared to be an innocuous storage building. Now, I want to share what the officers found when they descended those stone steps, because the discovery waiting in the darkness would finally answer the question that had haunted Father Marcus for 30 years. Write in the comments, hidden passages exist, if you believe some people will go to extraordinary lengths to conceal their darkest secrets. The descent into Blackwood's underground world revealed the true scope of his decades-long deception. Beyond the stone staircase, the officers encountered a heavy wooden door secured with an ancient-looking iron lock, but the discovery of a hidden key in a wall cavity suggested this barrier was designed more for concealment than genuine security. When Deputy Morrison turned that key and pushed open the door, the transformation from shed, storage to criminal lair became devastatingly clear. The tunnel system beyond defied all expectations for a supposedly simple drainage project. The passage stretched approximately 6 feet high and 3 feet wide, with carefully constructed stone walls supported by wooden beams at regular intervals. Despite Blackwood's attempts to make the construction appear ancient and weathered, the officers could identify evidence of relatively recent work throughout the tunnel system: modern concrete, reinforcements, machine-cut lumber, and construction techniques that belong to the 1980s rather than some forgotten historical era. The impact of walking through this man-made underground network created an atmosphere of growing dread among the investigating officers. The tunnel extended for several hundred feet and curved slightly in what appeared to be the direction of the former chapel site, suggesting a deliberate connection between Blackwood's residence and the location where 4 nuns had last been seen alive 3 decades earlier. Behind the scenes of this methodical exploration lay the realization that they were walking through the hidden truth of one man's carefully planned criminal enterprise. The mindset required to construct such an elaborate system of underground chambers spoke to premeditation and purpose that went far beyond crimes of opportunity or passion. When the tunnel finally opened into a small underground chamber, the discovery that awaited them would rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about the missing nuns case. Deputy Morrison's flashlight revealed crude furnishings: a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, a small table with the remains of what appeared to be food. But from the shadows came a whispered voice that transformed this criminal investigation into a miracle of survival. Sister Catherine Sullivan lay on the mattress, her 55-year-old face gaunt and aged beyond her years, her eyes sunken but remarkably alert. Her gray hair had been closely cropped, and she clutched what appeared to be a hand-carved wooden rosary created from scraps of wood and threads from clothing. When Deputy Morrison gently asked her name, she whispered her identity with a voice cracked from decades of limited use but carrying unmistakable clarity. The chamber itself told the story of 3 decades of imprisonment endured through unshakable faith. The walls were lined with crude religious carvings, crosses, saints, and biblical scenes that had been meticulously etched into stone using improvised tools, transforming a prison into a testament to spiritual endurance that defied human comprehension. Now, I want to share the moment when Father Marcus learned that his sister was alive, because the reunion that followed would demonstrate how faith can survive even the darkest circumstances imaginable. Write in the comments, faith transcends suffering, if you believe the human spirit can endure anything when sustained by unshakable belief. The full scope of the tragedy hidden beneath Blackwood's property became clear as Deputy Morrison's flashlight swept across the chamber's far corner. There, partially covered with a tattered blanket, lay skeletal remains that would later be identified as Sister Rose Martinez. The transformation from rescue mission to crime scene investigation happened in that devastating moment when officers realized they were dealing with both a miraculous survival and a decades-old murder. Sister Catherine's weak voice provided the heartbreaking context when she whispered that Rose had went to God many years ago. The impact of learning that one of the 4 missing nuns had died during their long captivity added layers of grief and evidence complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Behind the scenes, this discovery triggered immediate protocols for forensic investigation, as law enforcement now faced both a living victim requiring medical attention and human remains that would serve as crucial evidence in prosecuting Blackwood for his crimes. The journey from underground prison to emergency medical care moved swiftly once paramedics arrived to assess Sister Catherine's condition. After 30 years of captivity, her physical state was critical but stable, requiring immediate transport to the nearest hospital equipped to handle such an extraordinary case of prolonged isolation and potential psychological trauma. Father Marcus's transformation from searching brother to witness of a miracle reached its culmination when he was finally permitted to see his sister in the hospital's intensive care unit. The mindset shift from 3 decades of grief to overwhelming gratitude created an emotional experience that transcended ordinary human comprehension. When their eyes met for the first time since she was 25 years old, he recognized something profound that had survived even the darkest circumstances imaginable. Despite the ravages of time, suffering, and unthinkable imprisonment, Catherine's eyes still held the spiritual light that had defined her since childhood, where once they had sparkled with youthful devotion, they now appeared as wells of unfathomable experience, reflecting depths of faith that had sustained her through horrors no human being should endure. The hidden truth about Sister Catherine's survival became apparent in her first whispered words to her brother. Rather than expressing anger, despair, or questions about why God had allowed such suffering, she simply stated that God had never left her during those 30 years of underground captivity. This demonstration of unshakable faith revealed how the human spirit can transcend even the most evil circumstances when anchored by absolute trust in divine love. The impact of witnessing such spiritual resilience after decades of imprisonment challenged every assumption about human endurance and divine providence. Her lips formed words of recognition and faith that somehow transcended the horror of her ordeal, suggesting that some truths about the nature of God's presence become more clear through suffering rather than comfort. Now, I want to explore what this miraculous discovery revealed about the true nature of Victor Blackwood's crimes and how justice would finally be served after 30 years of hidden evil. Write in the comments, "Miracles still happen," if you believe some stories of survival demonstrate divine intervention in human affairs. The discovery of Sister Catherine Sullivan after 30 years of captivity represents one of the most extraordinary survival stories in modern history. Her unwavering faith in the face of unimaginable darkness reminds us that the human spirit, when anchored by something greater than ourselves, can endure circumstances that would break most people completely. Victor Blackwood was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the kidnapping, imprisonment, and murder of the 4 nuns. The investigation revealed a pattern of psychological abuse spanning 3 decades, motivated by a pathological hatred of religious women that stemmed from his own traumatic childhood experiences. Sister Catherine's survival became a testament not just to human resilience, but to the power of faith to sustain us through our darkest hours. If stories like this one resonate with you, tales that explore the depths of human darkness while celebrating the triumph of hope and faith, then you've found the right place. I spend countless hours researching these incredible true stories, digging deep into the details that reveal both the worst and best of human nature. When you subscribe, you're joining a community of people who believe that understanding these profound experiences helps us appreciate the miraculous nature of survival, faith, and justice. For those of you who stayed with me through this entire journey from memorial service to miraculous rescue, drop a comment saying, "Faith never fails." It lets me know you experienced this story in its entirety, and honestly, it means everything to know you were with me until the very end. If this story moved you the way it moved me while researching it, a simple like helps more people discover these remarkable tales of human endurance and divine providence. There's a video right here that explores another case where faith sustained someone through impossible circumstances, a story that will challenge everything. You think you know about the power of belief in the darkest moments. Click and continue with me over there, because some stories are too important to experience alone.